Welcome. I'm John, one of the owners here, and there's Kelly, the other owner, and Roy, who helped. He spotted and installed this fabulous show by Jeff By, who's here to talk with us today. The show, as most of you probably know, is brand new. It just opened on Thursday, so we're very excited to have Jeff here at the very beginning of the show to talk about it. I'm especially interested to hear him talk about this show because there are some definite changes or shifts in the work. There's the subject matter. We have, you'll see a lot of the paintings are taggers and graffiti artists, and that's at least for us new. And then also, I've noticed some more subtle changes in style and technique, which I'm going to be interested to hear about until Jeff turns around and says, no, there aren't. But anyway, hopefully there are.
No, there's always...
So to me. So before I tell you a bit about Jeff, let me just let you know how we're set up. So as you all know, here in the gallery, we're live streaming this. So here in the gallery, obviously you can just ask Jeff questions. But if you're watching on the live stream, if you type the question into the comments section, we'll go ahead and read it to Jeff here in the gallery. Just so you know, in the live stream, there's a little bit of delay, so don't wait until the very end to type the question because we may not see it before the talk ends. So a little bit about Jeff. He attended the Rhode Island School of Design for his undergraduate degree, and he spent a year abroad in Italy under the European Honors Program. He received his MFA in painting from the School of Figurative Art, which is also known as the New York Academy. And at age 26, Jeff became the youngest master ever inducted into the Copley Society of Boston, where he was also given his first show. And with that, let me welcome Jeff By and thank him for being here.
Thank you. So, thank you. So I just want to say thank you to John and Kelly for giving me the opportunity to be able to speak about my current work. Also Roy, I mean, he does a wonderful job exhibiting the work, so it's very nice to see how he displays the work every 3 years of my work, so it's always nice to come in through those doors because I haven't visited my paintings for a while, so it's interesting to see how they're displayed on the white walls. So I want you to encourage you to ask questions throughout the duration of the artist talk. So I like that interaction with the I said students because I usually tell my students to do that, but with you, it's great to hear your comments about the work or the process, or if you want to know something more particular or specific about a particular painting, just let me know, okay? So I think the first thing I love about the city is like my first time experience going into New York City. I think everyone has a different impression, but I remember in middle school, we would always save up every year to go see a Broadway show. And during 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And I never really cared about the Broadway show, but what I really loved is going into the city on the buses because you're elevated, you have a really interesting perspective of the city, you're going through the Bronx and Harlem, which is very different from where I grew up in suburbia. So I think it's that wonderful contrast and excitement that I saw as a kid in middle school that just grabbed my attention right away, and I love the city. I think I love the burnt out buildings, the graffiti, their interaction with the people on the street. I think there was so much energy that just captivated my interest right away, and I just fell in love with that. And so there was something in the back of my mind that I always wanted, or I wanted to live in New York City. So after Rhode Island School of Design, I had my opportunity to live there for 15 years, wonderful years. And I just think the wonderful experiences about being in the city was always exciting because you never knew what was around the corner. Even going on the subway early morning, all the women who were going into the Wall Street area, putting on their makeup and the shifting of the subway cars, I just felt that was incredible visually, being able to witness that. And just the comical things that you see from day to day living in the city. So I think it was always very exciting. You never knew what was around the corner, like I mentioned, so you might see interesting people or different areas that would just captivate your interest as an artist. So I think, talk about certain pieces. The focus is, the show is called Vanishing Points. So it's just my love of looking at the different architectural elements of the city, how they're combined with one another, and finding different areas of the city to get interesting perspectives, either going from the bridges or going into abandoned buildings or buildings, getting access to the rooftops and getting a different perspective from the street level. And so, for example, this painting of the rooftops of Chinatown, which is a really familiar viewpoint from the Manhattan Bridge. You can also see it through the subway, but it's a great place for taggers to tag on the rooftop. And there were these wonderful 19th century buildings contrast to the more contemporary contemporary buildings in the distance, that is what I was really interested in. You know, the combination of the two different types of architecture, you know, the coloring of the sky, which is very purple, contrast to the warmth windows of some of the buildings, and having that contrast was very, you know, what inspired some of the work. And then of course, just the graffiti and the constantly changing of the graffiti on the surfaces. So. And of course, I love getting into abandoned buildings. So I've been doing that for decades, since the 90s, getting into, you know, factories, you know, movie theaters. So I think that is another aspect of my work, like workspace over here, where you get into a building where it has a wonderful skylight, and just like the airiness of the environment, it was what I was immediately attracted to. I love all the chaos and the textures that are in this space, contrast to, you know, the light filtering in and using different types of washes with opaque paint and getting that, you know, that variety in throughout the painting. Any questions at this point? Yes.
Not being an artist, I'm interested, when you see a scene like this, do you just happen to notice it because you're in the city, and then do you take out a camera?
Right, okay.
Do you go back to the scene?
Oh, yes, yes. So I'm constantly going back to these environments all the time. So, you know, either walking over the Manhattan Bridge, I know that I always, you know, want to take a visit to some of these places just to see how it's changed in terms of the graffiti, how it changes during like an early morning view, contrast to a mid-afternoon view, contrast to a night view, just to get a sense of the mood and how it affects the space and if I'm attracted to it. I use cameras to take images, constantly using my my iPhone camera as well as my Nikon camera. Also, I do sketches as well. So the reason I use sketches is because it kind of like edits to what I really want or I'm gravitating towards. So it's really important for me as an artist to go to these spaces multiple times, because at the beginning you don't know what you're going to be attracted to. You don't know if it's the graffiti or is it the buildings, is it the mood, the light. So all that is very different depending on the day. So that's why I go back multiple times to, you know, to see it, to see if what I am gravitating towards in terms of the time of day, or because of the different perspectives or the different graffiti. Yes?
Where is that?
That's actually in Europe. When I lived in Italy, I would travel around. So since in the early 90s, going to Belgium, going to France, going to a lot of these abandoned chateaus, and getting hooked up and getting into those spaces that have been abandoned since, I don't know when, maybe after World War II. So yes, I'm constantly exploring, not only in America, but also in Europe as well.
Do you know specifically where that is, or do you not remember?
That's for me. Sometimes I'm going to be selfish and keep that for myself. But yes, I think it's like that's certain places I don't mind talking about, but other places I think I enjoy keeping it a little bit more vague. So yes.
When you decide on something that you want to paint, is it a totally confident, instant decision, I'm going to paint this? Because I can imagine, you know, you could paint
Right.
millions of different things. How do you make that decision and then feel good about it, or do you sometimes regret it?
Yeah, I think there is an initial response that I want to paint it. I mean, I'm always walking around the city looking and observing different areas. So there is, like, this is something I definitely wanted to paint for a long time. I've also painted this during the day. So this is the second painting of the rooftops in Chinatown. So yes, it's initial reaction towards towards what I'm looking at, and I can't wait to put it down on canvas. So that's why I constantly go back and do my method of exploring and making sure I'm getting an interesting perspective, checking out the different times during the day. So yes, I mean, even with the graffiti artists, the walls are always an important part of my painting. The surfaces, the textures. I really love the movement of the figures and how blurred they've become, contrast to the stationary wall and these graphic shapes that come out. It kind of reminds me of just like Matisse playing with his cutouts and using paper and using those really bright, wonderful colors, contrast to the white of the paper. So I think that was an inspiration for doing in this series, is just, the colorfulness of the graffiti contrast to the people doing the graffiti, which are more muted and mundane. So, yeah. Yes?
Do you think, I see a lot of the same themes as in every opera paintings,
I enjoy Hopper, but I think there's a lot of differences. I think the surfaces are built up more in my paintings, contrast to Hopper. When you look at a Hopper painting, it's very evenly painted everywhere. The attention is similar from the background to the figure. That's very sharp in terms of how he's using light to enter these spaces. Even the people are very angular. It feels like they're trapped in these paintings. Contrast to what I think mine feel like they are moving around. There's more of an energy. There's a blurriness to the piece, or excuse me, to the figures. So I think there's a big difference. But yes, I love Hopper. I love the fact that it's New York City and so forth. But I think I'm different in terms of how I'm painting the figure, how I'm building up the textures, how other areas are very soft and almost diffuse compared to other areas that are built up and more representational. So there's a variety of spaces and to navigate through the painting. So.
I love the title, Vanishing Points, and I love how there are points in your paintings where you feel like you're vanishing, the city is vanishing.
Right.
I love that contrast with the sharpness and then
Right, the faded. Yeah, and I think that's new what John was talking about. So there's areas that I'm not building up and putting so much detail. I'm softening those areas. So there are areas where you can rest as the viewer when you're navigating through the painting. There are other areas that are built up either with the paint or more representational. So there's that nice contrast throughout the painting. So there's just not all even tone in terms of how the colors used and how it's built up with the paint. So, yes?
So given how much graffiti there is, were you a graffiti artist or did you have a desire to be a graffiti
That's a
artist?
good question. You know, no, I've always appreciated graffiti, but I wanted to paint it on canvas contrast to actually hitting a wall or tagging a wall. So I think, you know, that's what I feel comfortable with. And I love just, like I said, going in the cities in the 80s and 90s and having that fresh, colorful aspect of the city was always something that I just gravitated towards with my eyes, and I've always wanted to paint it. I love the pop culture of the time from the 70s, 80s. I mean, I grew up in that era, so I feel like that's just a part of my culture and part of me just wanting to express on canvases. Yes?
Graffiti artists ever get to see their work? Like the person who actually...
Right, some of them no, because yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, sometimes I work with some of the graffiti on social media, so I can find out where they're tagging, and I do show them my work, so they're like willing to allow me to photograph them and do little sketches, which they're so quick in terms of what they're executing. They're always in dark clothes, and it's always in these obscure areas of New York City at night. But because of social media, I've been able to get access to them a little bit more than going out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and hoping that I come across someone. But you know, that was not the only reason I was going out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was just to enjoy the city and see a different perspective at night, contrast during the day.
But then you go back during the day to finish up to see once the graffiti's finished.
Right, yeah, you could. I have done that in the past, but you know, it's mostly like trying to get that, you know, that reaction at night and try to make sketches and so forth to see how things are, you know, coming out in terms of the graphic quality of the graffiti, contrast to the other areas of the wall and so forth. So, yes.
Could you talk about your social?
I'm in Social Club. Okay, so this is based in like Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and also out in Bay Ridge. There's a number of these old school men's parlors that I've always loved going in and seeing through, walking past them. And so I started to go into some of these spaces, and because of just the people, and I love the figure because as John mentioned, I went to the School of Figure of Art, and that's one of my passions is working with the figure and loving older people too, because there's so much more character in their faces and so forth. So I was drawn to these areas, and I'm still investigating a lot of these parlors around Pennsylvania and these small towns, and it's a similar feel in terms of the environment, the clutteredness, just the stories you hear while you're in these spaces. And so I think that whole energy is what captivated my interest to create this piece. And it was very difficult to do because it took like more than 2 years to create this work of art. And, you know, trying to switch out different figures, figuring out the poses, trying to get an understanding of like where do I start to soften areas or make other areas a little bit more detailed. So I think that combination is something that's a challenge. Contrast to maybe some of the graffiti art, which is it's more based on shape and color and movement. So this was so that's the backstory of that painting. And just the greenery of the space, contrast to the red seats on the barber chairs. I love that, that tension that is created between those two values.
I think due to the form of that, it makes it super narrative and almost sort of cinematic, like the way that it rolls
Right.
out. And that's, I think that.
Yeah, I just kept on adding to it. I think you could keep going in terms of the size and the span.
Story that's unfolding, like almost scene by scene in the way that you've structured it.
Right, yeah. So.
And is there a reason that there's a split canvas?
I just kept on adding to it. So I just kept on expanding. So I first originally had some of the figures and I was like, oh, this is not working. So I just kept on adding to the painting. So I kept on having it grow. So there's no like, there wasn't a particular, like, I want to make a diptych. It was just kept on expanding.
I think that add-on will add to that cinematic feeling. It's adding a chapter.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a diptych. Traditionally, when you're making a diptych, they can work as separate paintings, and then they come together and work as a painting altogether. That's the concept behind using a diptych or a triptych. But in the case of this, it was just it just kept on growing. So in terms of just like I wanted to add more figures to balance the figure to the left, and the ladies that are on the mirror that are taped. So I wanted to have another strong figure to the right to balance that out. Yeah. Yes?
The introduction into the teaching, so where do you teach?
Oh, well, I teach at Penn State and also at Elizabethtown College, so I teach painting and drawing. So yeah, it's a nice balance, so having my summers off and being able to create in the studio.
What's your focus in teaching? What sort of messages and lessons are you trying to impart?
Well, it's more formal training. So they're learning about the foundation skills of learning about proportion, value, so that's what it's a good foundation class, so what they're learning. I do teach advanced painting, so then we can start to work more with the figure, which is the most complicated subject matter. And we start to think about like mark making narrative scenes, combining figures to create a narrative image. So those are the things that we focus on for advanced painting, contrast to, painting one, which is more about trying to make sure they're getting the color correct. It's more of these formal training methods.
And then what's your connection to Maine?
My parents have a place up here, so I've been coming up here since the 80s. And I went to Maine College of Art for a summer program. So and before it was Portland School of Art. So yeah, and I just always loved Maine in terms of the color and the value that's up here in the summertime. So yeah. So yes.
Do you paint your art with like would you sometimes paint it when you're mad or like when you're feeling sad would you paint it or like when you're feeling really happy do you get more done?
Emotion does come in, yes. We're all our artists, so yes, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think, yeah, you get an aggressiveness out with your paint depending on, your mood. So there could be, the thickness of how I'm applying the paint and using the brush to scratch the paint across the surfaces, and, when you're happy, I think it's just a joy to be in the studio in your own world and not have to deal with the outside world. I think that's when I'm extremely happy. That's a good question. Very good.
So speaking of emotion, do you grow attached to your paintings ever to the point where, if you sell them, you may think to yourself, gosh, I'm never going to see this again. Like, is it bittersweet when they leave? Or?
Right. I think when you do a body of a work, you're totally exhausted from it, I think, and you want that change. I think you're so excited about the next project. I think when it was interesting, as I was talking to Kelly and John, like when you get paintings back that didn't sell, the first thing you do is you start changing it because you just see all the imperfections that you didn't see before. So you're kind of excited to see them again. You're like, oh, I got this back, so I can fix it. I can change it. I think that's where your mind goes, instead of like, oh, I didn't sell this. I'm sad because I don't want to touch it. But it's always like, for me, or for probably most artists, you're just if it's sitting around the studio, it's going to change into a different direction, or it will be painted over. So I think those are the things that come across when you start to get older work back from a show. You just want to, make those corrections right away because you've had that distance and you haven't looked at your paintings for a while. And that's something like with the process I was talking about. When I'm doing a show, I'm having 20 or 30 paintings going at once, and I keep rotating them out so I don't become too precious with one particular painting. I can put it aside and make those adjustments maybe a week or two later, and I can see it a lot clearer than, some people want to go from A to Z on their painting. They do one painting at a time, but for me, I like to switch it up. And yes?
What kind of music do you listen to, and does it change depending on
It's all jazz. It's heavily with Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Stan Getz. So yes, I have a lot of jazz, but then I switch it up to more pop, like Michael Jackson, or So yeah, there's that variety. Especially with my wife, she loves different types of music. So when she's in my studio space, or our studio space, she switches the music. So it's always, it's nice to have that variety.
I think they would enjoy hearing your routine of what, he has a certain routine or structure with your music. Like, what do you do first?
What do I do?
You
What?
start with vinyl.
Right, yes, that's true. Oh, that's right. Yes, I start with vinyl because I have an old school Marantz. So it's my dad's from 1968. So I'll start putting on the old jazz, like Miles Davis, like I mentioned, or Stan Getz, or John Coltrane. And then I'll switch that off into CDs because I'm getting involved with a painting and I don't want to keep flipping the album every like 30 minutes. So that's the process. Having coffee, getting involved with the work. And so yeah, that's the day in the life of a studio as an artist. So, and then taking breaks eventually, but then continually go back into the painting later on the day. I think like my most productive time is like early morning, and then I kind of slow down, and then around 4 or 5 o'clock it starts to pick up again. I get so excited to start painting. I can paint till like 6 or 7 o'clock at night at times. So yeah, I think it's everything is different in terms of their routine.
So when you were growing up, you mentioned when you used to go to the city in middle school and you're very attuned to the environment.
Right.
From that time to the time that you made the decision to go to RISD, so clearly, you were going to a special type of undergrad experience.
Right.
When did you self-identify, like, I'm an artist, this is who I am?
I think it was like around 9 or 10. This is what I wanted to do. I mean, all through high school, it was my comfort zone. I think it's where I got excited. It's where my mind just came alive. Being in front of a painting, moving around. I could never sit, and just going to classes at RISD, especially their liberal arts classes. It was very challenging because you're in the studio for so long and you're moving around and you're interacting with other students and you're looking at whatever you're drawing or painting. And I kind of liked that movement. And when you start to sit stationary, it kind of does, you get really tired and everything becomes very heavy. But once you start to go into that classroom, especially the smell of turpentine, it makes me so excited. It's just like something goes off in my mind where I just want to start painting or start to create. So I think there's that. Those smells of going into another artist studio is incredible. I think it's one of the most exciting things. And then, looking at what they're doing, I think just energizes you to start to create too. Or you get frustrated if you can't create. Especially living and working in New York City and working for Local 829 and doing all the mural work for, the Metropolitan Opera or all these movie sets. You would be on a movie set for like 6 months or 3 months, and then you would have a month off. And you had so much energy that you kind of exploded in the studio, but you didn't grow because you didn't have that time to, to develop a painting, and it's such a long process. So you just kind of would just throw up, you know, what you knew, and you never grew. So you would always go to a certain level, but because of teaching and having that flexibility to be in the studio more and having my summers off and getting distance from your artwork too, because I was living with it in New York City. When you're living with your artwork, I think it makes you go crazy too, because you're constantly thinking about it. So it's nice to have a studio space and shut that door, and when you leave, just go decompress, and then the next day, you know, you're excited to go back into this space and create. So I think that's been very helpful to have a studio space separate from my living space. Yes?
Do you ever paint from your mind, or is always a visual reference?
Oh, I do, yeah. I think there's you definitely work from your memories. There's a lot of paintings where I'll start to change the situation of the light or how things bend, which might not naturally anatomically be correct, and I kind of push those elements. Especially with the graffiti artists and the movement and softening certain areas of the figure, you know, I think that also just trying to see that movement from my memory and how they move and how they interact with the wall. Yes?
So the wash you have, everything has this nice soft blur
Right.
that you was talking about. Is that something you add last, or do you do that as you go?
I do it as I go. So I'll start to put, when I start to work on certain areas and I build them up in terms of the texture and, you know, the detail, then I'll start to soften it back by using these transparent washes, using copal, also using the turpentine to spray on the copal, which starts to make this bubbly effect, which is kind of interesting on the surface of the painting, where you'll start to see it in this area of the painting where it starts to come away from the copal. So yeah, there's it's a constant pushing back and forth from going detail to softening as I develop the painting. It's similar to what Degas did. I think we were talking about Degas the other day, how he'll make things really detailed, and then he'll start to soften by just smudging his hand across and making things a little bit more vague. So there's that type of process in terms of creating the work. Yes?
I remember the first time I saw your work here, which was years ago now, at this gallery, Greenhut, and being immediately struck by all the qualities and things we're talking about here, the light, the color, the vanishing, the wash, the energy, and the gesture.
Right.
And I remember you speaking about the Metropolitan Opera, having experience and that being your job, seeing a painting. And
Right.
I'm curious as to how much did that inform your gesture and the way you represent color to be working on that scale, or did you arrive with this in signature?
Right. Well, working at the Metropolitan Opera and working on those larger sets, it's so like you're painting specifically things from the designer. So there's really not much, you know, play in terms of like work, you know, using your own expression. It's all very, you know, like laid out before you what you need to execute. I think the thing that's easier for me as a painter is working larger, because you can get into the painting easier, contrast to working on smaller scale paintings, which is really tight and detailed, and sometimes, and so when you're doing larger paintings, you can be a lot more gestural with your work. You can get involved with the painting easier and moving out of the painting, and it moves quicker sometimes for me working from a larger scale contrast to a smaller paintings. So
Did that experience of working with it in the theater impact the way you work in the studio?
not really, because it's very graphic, and it's, you know, it's very simple in terms of, you know, you're working on large spaces, so it's really hard to see the scale of it. You have to go up. There's a section of up in the Bronx where we're working on the murals where you have to be elevated. There's a room where you can overlook the whole drop, so you can get an idea of that perspective, because it's so huge in terms of the scale. So yeah, it's just a total different. It's like work. So you're going fast. You're moving. You're there because of how quick you can paint and figure out color and all that. So you're just executing their vision compared to, you know, using that and trying to incorporate into your own work, which is very different for me.
How big is your studio that you can get away? I had an art teacher who wouldn't let me put anything on it unless I was 15 feet away.
Oh yeah, it's similar to this space here. Yeah. So there's not much distance, so, you know, getting back and forth. But I do have a mirror to see the reflection of the work, which is very important as an artist. So that allows you to see if there's anything that's wrong in the mirror. You can start to look and change. So there's that I have. There. Questions?
Do you get excited when you find a new empty building?
Oh yeah. I'm searching for that right now. Yes, I think there's that constant search of exploring and getting into these spaces that are quite exciting because they're so quiet and again, just gravitating towards the textures, the patinas, especially the movie theaters. I think there's just an eerie quality about them when you walk in, but then you're so calmed by the environment, and there's not much light coming into these buildings, so you don't have that type of environment where you can see the light coming across the space and how it changes the mood. So yeah, can't wait to explore the next building, and just because you don't know what's there, and I think it's that curiosity factor where things have been boarded up for decades, and then being able to experience it and seeing all the chandeliers, all the marble, and it's just quite wonderful, especially even going into the movie projector rooms and seeing that space. So that's always an excitement of just being able to know what's around the corner. Like in New York, you never know what you're going to see. So I think that's the excitement of always being an artist, is always pushing yourself to look at different things. And yes. What's what? What's my favorite food? Swordfish. I love swordfish and steak.
I noticed one difference in your previous work that we've shown in this work. You used to do a lot of drips and splats. I like them equally with and without, but what made you decide to
Oh,
move beyond that?
I think they were becoming more of a distraction, and I felt that they were overwhelming the painting at times. So I think I started to get away from that type of process. I think and I think you see in certain areas the drips and the way I'm using these vertical marks to soften areas of the painting. That's still relevant in the work. But I kind of wanted to get rid of some of that because it was overwhelming other areas of the painting, and I wanted to make sure there was a nice balance. So, yeah, yes.
When you're painting a subject matter like New York City, is that, do you stay with that subject matter for a period of time, or do you say, well, okay, next week I'm going to go paint a rural scene, or do you say, no, I'm in my New York City mode? I just don't know, are the dates of all these in a similar period of time?
Right, yeah, this has been, the work that you see here has been for the last 2 years.
Okay.
So, I keep developing, the graffiti artist compared to the urban landscape, so there's that constant search for, having that, balance of working on the urban landscapes. I did have a show last year which focused more on the interiors, but it's very similar in terms of the subject matter, getting into these abandoned buildings and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, the landscape that was out there in the hallway was just to break up, the constant working with these urban environments, but mostly I'm focusing on the urban landscape for a show and the theme of the show. So I don't alleviate and go, I'm going to work on 6 rural landscape paintings. So, yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned making corrections or improvements to paintings. For someone who doesn't know a thing about painting, can you just tell us technically, how is that done? Are you painting over things, or how does that work?
Right, yeah, I'll start to scrape them apart. So after a certain area, if I don't like it, sometimes we'll sand it down with sandpaper. Sometimes I'll use my blade to get rid of the excess paint, and then I'll start to go over that area again. So yeah, it's a constant, and sometimes it's immediately. Right, exactly. So sometimes it's immediately oh, I had a hard day, it's not working out, I'll scrape away, so the next day I can start to go back into that area of the painting and rework it as a fresh start. So yes.
So Jeff, can you talk about how much of this is brushwork, palette knife, other applications like that?
Right. I mean, like I explained, excuse me, my throat. Okay. Yep. All these conditions. No. When I start off with a painting, yes, I'm using larger brushes. Of course, I'm using the palette knife to flatten areas out. And as I keep progressing the painting, you know, there's certain areas that I'm gravitating towards, like wall surfaces that will keep applying the paint, either with the palette knife or with the brush, depending on how I feel it's working out or not. So, you know, as you keep progressing and you keep looking, there's certain things that I'll take away. And like I said, I'll sand down certain areas that have built up because of the palette knife and the brush work and try to bring it back to a smoother surface. And then I'll go back and keep reapplying the paint to make it feel that it's working with the rest of the area of the building or a figure and so forth. So there is that constant, like, you know, interaction with both methods because I love the flatness of the blade contrast to the brush where, you know, it's a little bit softer in terms of how you're using or utilizing the brush.
How long did it take to paint?
I don't remember because it just kept on, because I kept on rotating. I mean, because like I said, this whole show was like 2 years in the making, almost 3 years in the making. So, you know, I bounce back and forth for each painting. Like I said, sometimes paintings will take a couple of weeks. Other times they'll take years in order to paint. There's a number of paintings I didn't even put in the show just because they're just not ready. So they're laying in the studio, covered up at this point until I get back and see it with a fresh eye because it's been a couple of days. So I'm excited to go check out the older work that's there.
So most of your work here is cityscapes and architectural, but I mean, the personalities you bring out in the people is amazing, but you tend to lean more towards that architectural side of things. Is that
I love both. I love working with the figure. I mean, I love to be working with the nude more, but you know, sometimes those paintings don't sell. So there's a lot of figure work in the studio that I haven't exhibited just because I know that, you know, it's more for me. So there's a lot of head studies of people that I've painted. There's a lot of nudes that I have in the studio that I don't really display just because of that factor. And I have to make money, so that's just the reality of things. And a lot of the galleries don't want nudes. So there's another, that's just because they can't sell them. So because they become very personable to the person who I'm painting or someone that they know. So I think there's that aspect. And this is universal. I mean, you know, it's not just, you know, Greenhut, it's like a lot of galleries just don't want that. So I think, and because I love the city and how it's changed, especially when I was living there, was cleaning up with Giuliani and everything, and you were losing a lot of these buildings to development. So that was, after I was going to school at the School of Figurative Art, which I loved doing the figure, I wanted to concentrate more on the cityscapes because it was changing very quickly. You know, especially from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, nothing changed, and all of a sudden, you know, early 2000s, things were just disappearing. The mom and pop places, you know, the record stores, all these places that I inhabited on a daily basis were kind of disappearing, and that's why I wanted to create that before. I don't see them anymore because there's so many places that I've missed that I'm kind of angry about. I wish I had a time machine to go back. Yes. I hang out with you. Yeah, it's a nice to have a balance with my kids and the artwork because I think, you know, you can, especially like I think living in New York and having your work there constantly in your face, it's nice, like I mentioned, to get away from the studio and to come home and not thinking about painting and, you know, focus my attention on my daughters and my wife and so forth. So I think it's really a nice balance for me as an artist, yes.
Do you typically work on more than one piece at a time?
Yes, like I mentioned, I probably have 20 or 30 paintings going at once, so I keep rotating them out so I don't become too precious with one particular painting, and it allows me to make those adjustments. So I might work on like this for maybe 2 weeks or a week, and then I'll put it aside and I'll start to work on another painting. So it just gets the freshness, it allows me to have that distance so I can make those necessary changes.
So when you look at something a couple weeks later, sometimes you pull it out and think, what was I thinking of that?
Yes, all the time. And then there are days where you go in and you're like, oh, I'm a rock star. This is fantastic. And then the next morning you walk in and you're like, what was I thinking? You know, and so I think it's hard to get out of the studio at times, especially because you work all day on it. And so around 4 or 5 o'clock, you know, if you're going home, it takes me a long time to get out of the studio because you're contemplating what you just did for the last 6 or 7 hours. So there's that conversation that you have, and you keep looking, and, you know, you try to get some distance to see if it's still responding the way that you saw it, like, you know, an hour or 2 hours ago. So yeah.
Is it hard to call it done, and do you ask your family for their opinion?
That is hard. I think the best part of creating a painting is the beginning, and then it's the hardest part to finish a painting. And I think that's where you leave it alone for like 6 months. You think you have it perfect. I bring it down in the basement of my studio and I don't look at it. And then I can go back within that time frame and then start to look, like I said, like I can see those things that I want to adjust. And that's how I kind of, you know, finish a painting, is I don't want to look at it for like 5 or 6 months. And then I can see if it's totally done. Do I get the same reaction? Am I still excited about looking at it? Or does it, you know, are there areas that need to be adjusted?
Are you surprised when something doesn't sell and you get it back and you think, what are people thinking?
Oh yeah, constantly. Yeah, what are they thinking? Yeah, I think there's definitely that dialogue, but then I mentioned, like, sometimes it's exciting because then you can change it and fix it, right? So there's that. Right, and yeah, there's always that frustration, you know, but I think, you know, the thing that keeps me motivated is that you did it. You created something, you know, it's one of a kind. It's not being mass produced. I think just being, you know, because there's a lot of abandoned buildings that I've painted, theaters, and I'm just like, this is so much more interesting than like flowers, or, you know, like, you know, not that flowers can't be exciting, but it's so, not many people are painting these buildings. Not many people, there's a lot of photography, there's a lot of photographers capturing these spaces, but not many people are painting these abandoned buildings, or, you know, the schools that have been abandoned since the 60s or 70s. So I think, you know, there's that's what separates me from, you know, the photographer's contrast to a painting, because I think you can do so much more with a painting. Just for me personally, you can soften it, you can make it darker. Not that you can't do that with photography, but you can make things so subtle that, you know, I think it's just different with the tactile medium, you know, that weight of the oil paint. So that gets me really excited. When you go up to a photograph, you don't see all this paint coming out at you. You know, there's not like all this texture that is just roughed on the canvas surface, which is always exciting for me. Yes?
How do you get pictures of the taggers if they try to avoid other people?
Well, like I said, I came across a number of them working, so it was just by chance. And then sometimes with social media, like with Instagram, they're posting their tags, so you can show them your own personal work, and they can see that you're an artist. You're not there to report them, you know. So and I think there's that similar interest of, you know, being creative, and so it's easier to approach the graffiti artists that way because we have a similar interest.
How many paintings do you think you've done through your career? Have any ideas?
Oh, I don't know. That's, yeah, I don't know, like 5,000 or 6,000 maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because there's a lot of them I destroyed too as a kid. So, you know, all the drawings, all the, you know, so there's that constant, you know, creative aspect of my being. Yes?
Do you have relationships with specific taggers, or is it more just like a community posting, some tagging is going to happen? You're like, you have ongoing relationships with specific taggers?
Not really. You know, I show them the work sometimes, but you know, I try to just, you know, whenever I'm like they're tagging, you know, sometimes they'll post it on Instagram, or sometimes, you know, I'll go, hey, where are you going to be next? And, you know, there's that interaction. But, you know, other than that, you know, they're doing their thing, I'm doing my thing. So it's just quite different. But
do they like respond positively, or are they like flattered that you're?
yeah, they are. Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely that interaction where they're like, oh, cool, that's so fantastic. It's you know, because it is a painting, you know, so it's quite different compared to what they're doing.
You're capturing that moment because you're saying your art statement. They're getting tagged over.
Right, exactly.
Like memorialize
they're being, right, right, and yeah, so, and sometimes, like, you know, some of the images I get are very, you know, blurred or faded, so sometimes I have to use myself as a model. If I want something specifically, like the hand, you know, I'll start to use myself. My wife will take pictures of me in the studio going into certain poses, so there's that, you know, because you know, they're moving so quickly, so it's more gestural, and like that's why they're so fogged and softer in terms of how I applied the paint on the graffiti.
Done that you made them sort of spectral, because it is a blink or you don't miss that experience.
Right, and also they're kind of like disappearing too in the painting too. I kind of wanted that, like they're really fading out, contrast to the other elements of the graffiti, which are brighter in terms of the color and so forth. Yeah, good question.
So how much on that sort of similar topic? I mean, obviously you're using artistic license to make your painting, but for instance, like the painting right there.
This one?
Is all that graffiti actually there, or are you like?
Yes. Yep.
Using some artistic
No,
license?
no. It's not. Yeah, just a rarity that I'll start to put other tags that weren't there. You know, so yeah, this was all there. So Jet, Seafood, Sick Kid, because there used to be Alpha, Mango here, and they repaint. You know, the last painting I sold of the rooftop. So yeah, it's constantly changing. You know, then that's why I love going back to these spaces multiple times, different times during the day. You know, different seasons, just to get an idea of what's been tagged recently. Just you know, again, like the mood of the environment of the spaces. How does that relate in relationship to the flatness of the tags and so forth?
How critical do you feel it is to accurately represent those tags? So if you're going to copy them, do you feel like you have to really be right on so that you're representing them, or is it still interpreting your own?
Yes and no, because sometimes I'll start to fade them out depending on the other elements of the painting, like, you know, with the architecture. So it all depends on how I evolve the painting. Do I want it softer? Do I want it louder? So I think it's just myself, you know, looking at the piece and figuring out what's most important, what I'm going to edit out on certain, you know, tags. It's like, you know, how I'm going to, like, this is like very loud contrast to the graffiti that's down here, where I started to put layers and transparent washes to start to soften those tags. Any other questions about the paintings?
Are your children budding artists? Are they going to be coming up in the world?
I think so. They have the bug. They love to create. So my oldest, she likes to do a lot of felting. So that's her love and passion. And Eliza loves to draw, and she loves to sing. So we have her having singing lessons at this point. So it's great. Well,
What do you think you're going to be going from here? Do you have any themes you want to get into in the future that you haven't explored yet?
I think I would like to do some more, well, I think it's going to be a continuation of investigating the theaters, you know, a lot of these abandoned buildings, of course, you know, the urban landscapes, but I would like to do some more just rural landscape painting, you know, just to get out there and do some plein air painting, just to break it up a little bit. So.
Will you change your style, you think? I mean, you said you went from that more drift type.
I don't know. That's the exciting part. I don't know yet. I don't want to put any restrictions on anything. So I just want to start to see how I react. But yeah, I imagine it being in a different environment, it's going to create a whole different way of painting for me, or how I approach something. But I just got to get my hands dirty. Yes. Oh, Evelina, Eliza, which one do you want to go? Stilton. Well, it's my favorite cheese. So I said Stilton, because I like it stinky. Yes. What's that? Oh yeah, my daughter loves animals. I paint, every Christmas I'll paint Evelina and Eliza an animal that they've seen at a zoo. So there's all these beautiful paintings of the animals, and they always keep, you know, trying to push me, like, you should sell your animal paintings. And I'm just like, no, those are for you. Well, any other questions? Any? Yes?
So you painted enough pieces at this point in your career. Like, have you ever been surprised to go to a dinner party or go to an event space and see yourself on the wall? Like, does that happen?
No, that hasn't actually happened. But I think being in the studio, I think you're always trying to push yourself as an artist, because I think the best part is when you're bored, because then you start to play around more. I think you start to search. So I think, after a show, it's kind of nice to just settle down, relax, and then just do some paintings that are really just, I guess, they're not going to be really shown, so you can take more chances and start to figure out what direction you want to go next. So I think there's that nice flexibility after a big show is to just get in the studio and just start to go in different directions. So that's why I mentioned like maybe doing, more landscape painting or, or just fun things, just to see what area might be interested, or like how I'm painting something, or thinking about going in a different direction in the process, keeping things more open and so forth. So I don't know. That's what, it's the endless possibilities of being in the studio. I think it's just quite exciting. So. All right. What's that?
Where did your wife get her great shoes?
Oh, you bailed him out. You should have seen if you could answer. Right up on the hour.
Okay.
If there's no further questions, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
So it's a peek into my world. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.